Hey guys, what's up? LeoHightower here, back up on YouTube once again with another exciting video. Well, not exactly exciting, but just another small video I've managed to put together throughout the course of time that I have. This video is basically another video game collection video, and this time I'm showing off, of course, all my Game Boy Advance games, or basically all the Game Boy games I got at the moment, and of course I'll also show off my Game Boy player, which I got for my GameCube. It's been a long time since, as many of you know, of course, I love the Game Boy. I love Nintendo's Game Boy system, whether it be the original Game Boy, the Game Boy Color, and of course the Game Boy Advance and Game Boy Advance SP. I've had at least maybe 3 or 4 Game Boys throughout my time gaming and everything. My first Game Boy was, of course, the purple Game Boy Color, which I got with at least a total of 4 games. And after that I moved on to the Game Boy Advance. My first was the regular Game Boy Advance, which was the white one. And I had a good time and fun with that one, but as time passed, of course, I got little marks on the screen, little dust specks inside the screen and everything. And I had a good collection of games the first time I got the Game Boy Advance. Then after that I moved on to the much better Game Boy Advance SP, and my first one was Crimson Red. Then after that, when the red one got stolen during my time in high school, I got a Platinum Game Boy Advance. And then sometime afterwards, like an idiot, I traded in both Game Boy Advances when I got them back, as well as my whole peripheral games and whatnot, which was pretty stupid because I wanted extra money. But I managed to get most of my Game Boy Advance games back and everything, and of course during my trip to Hastings out here in Longview one time, I managed to get a hold of a Game Boy player, which would allow me to hook up to the GameCube and play the Game Boy games on the big screen. I never did ever get a Super Game Boy, which was for Super Nintendo, and I doubt I ever will, because you know how rare that is to find, of course. But anyway, in this video I'm going to show off, of course, my Game Boy Advance games, and of course my Game Boy games that I have, the games that and of course I'll name off the Game Boy games that I used to have and everything. So I think for now, I think we're just gonna get started on this video, so let's get started, shall we?
Exterminating evil gives you strength, but are you strong enough to face your greatest fear? Metroid Fusion, only on Game Boy Advance. Rated E for everyone.
After a 20-year sibling rivalry, Mario and Luigi team up using synchronized super moves in their most ridiculous adventure ever. Mario and Luigi, Superstar Saga. Rated E for everyone.
As many of you know, of course, I love Nintendo, but the one thing I loved more than anything from Nintendo was the Game Boy. And of course, there's any other handhelds that Nintendo put out, like maybe the DS or 3DS. In this video, of course, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to show off all the Game Boy Advance games and show off images of the ones that I used to have back then, the ones that I don't have anymore. There's not much to the collection, unfortunately, but the one thing I'm going to show off is, of course, the Game Boy player, which is attached to my GameCube. Just a minute. Oh yeah, I need to flip the image around real quick. There we go. And what you see before you is, of course, my Nintendo GameCube, but attached to the bottom of it is the Game Boy player. Sorry, the Game Boy player. Let me just get it to... And of course there's the slot to insert the Game Boy Advance games, and the little slot to insert a USB for the Game Boy Advance, of course. I would take this thing down and off of the GameCube, but I'm not going to do it since I'm going to play GameCube later on afterwards. So I'm just going to leave it like it is. right here, what you see before you is a zippable Pokeball right here. Back then, I got this back then when I was still a Pokemon fanatic and everything, and inside of it was a Pokemon t-shirt, but now I use it as a storage device for my Game Boy Advance and Game Boy Color games. There's not much to the collection, unfortunately, so I'm just going to unzip this and show off all the Game Boy Advance games that I have and everything. Not going to be in any particular order or anything. First up, I'm going to show the Game Boy and Game Boy Color games. There's not that many, sadly. I had more, but I sold most of them back then. But anyway, there's only 3. First up is Metroid 2: The Return of Samus. Next up is Game Boy Color, other game, one of my favorites, Pokemon the Trading Card Game. And last but not least is Super Mario Land 3, Wario Land, one of my personal favorites. I got to play this one time with my cousin in Galveston a couple of years back, and when I found a copy at Game Exchange, I grabbed a copy. Okay, next up is the Game Boy Advance games. They're not going to be in any particular order. First up is Super Mario Advance, basically Super Mario Bros. 2 on the GBA. Next up is one of my personal favorites. I'm currently playing it again. Beat my high score on it. Metroid Fusion. Next up is the Castlevania Double Pack, which includes Castlevania Harmony of Dissonance and Aria of Sorrow. Next up is a popular cult classic RPG by Nintendo, Golden Sun. Excuse the way the cartridge looks. Next up is a classic NES series, Castlevania, the very first Castlevania. Close to beating it, but I got a lot of work to do on it again. Next up is, here we go, Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past 4 Swords. Next up is, I need to get back to it sometime and beat it badly, Legend of Zelda: The Minish Cap. Next up is the sequel to the first Golden Sun game, Golden Sun: The Lost Age. Next up is one of my personal favorites on the Game Boy Advance, Mega Man Zero. This is the first Mega Man Zero game. Next up is Metroid Zero Mission, remake of the original Metroid. Next up is Super Mario World, Super Mario Advance 2. Next up is a rare gem, wish they'd make a sequel to it. The DS version is a bit better though. Scourge Hive. I love this game. And last but not least is my personal favorite, Mario and Luigi Superstar Saga. And those are basically all the Game Boy Advance games I had back then. I had a lot more Game Boy Advance games than this, and of course Game Boy Color games, but unfortunately back then I sold most of them for cash and everything back then, which is unfortunate. Wish I still had most of them, but I can still play most of them on emulator, so I'm not worried or anything. Now I'm going to show off images of the Game Boy Advance games and whatnot that I used to have back then.
Mamma mia!
Games no longer in my collection that I miss more than anything that were near and dear to me, and of course that I regret selling off, of course, was Pokemon, or I should say were, Pokemon Pinball. A fun little Game Boy Color game which had a rumble feature inside of it. You could play on red or blue tables. I actually enjoyed playing this game a lot back then when I first got it on the Game Boy Color, and the Game Boy Color was one of the first Game Boy systems I actually had back then. But after a while I got fed up with it because I didn't have a Game Shark to allow me to keep the ball saver on for a good while, and it got really tedious for me trying to evolve my Pokemon when all of a sudden the ball saver goes off and boom, that's the end of the ball bonus. Ugh. Next up is a Game Boy Advance game which I love more than anything, a remake of the original on Nintendo, Kirby Nightmare in Dreamland. This was an awesome remake of the first game that came out on Nintendo, the NES. And I really liked the way how they redid everything on it, from the copy abilities and of course the graphics and of course the extra mini games you could play and everything. I really enjoyed playing that game from beginning to end. I even got 100% on it one time. It's just a shame that I can't find an actual copy anywhere because it's such a hard game to find. But oh well. At least I got it on emulator. Now the only thing I need is I need a controller to play on my emulators again. Anyway, next up is The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening Deluxe. I also got this game the first time I got the Game Boy Color, and I loved it to death, to a certain degree, but then afterwards I'm like, I can't really find too much to like about this game. It was good for a good pick up and play whenever I got bored after doing homework back then during middle school, and of course when I found the secret dungeon, which used color technology and everything, I was blown away, because this was the one Zelda game that was on a handheld that I never got to play or anything. It was pretty good, actually, from beginning to end, and unfortunately I never got the secret ending where Marin turned into a sequel at the end, but it was still good, though. It was still a good game. Anyway, moving on. Next up is, well, I didn't technically have this one in the collection, but I played it for a good while because a cousin of mine let me borrow it, and that was Pokemon Gold version. I enjoyed playing Pokemon Gold when I was still a big Pokemon fan back then, and it was pretty good actually, especially because of the day and night routines where you could catch Pokemon during the daytime and the nighttime, and it was very good actually. And that's all I really have to say about it. Next up is another game I had during the Game Boy Color when I first got it, Super Mario Bros. Deluxe. The only thing I didn't like about this game was racing against that damned black boo. Oh, that thing got on my nerves. Especially the red coin challenge. Ooh-wee. Next up is Pac-Man Special Edition, Special Color Edition, which included Pac Attack as a bonus game. It was fun. Pac-Man's always fun to play through, especially Pac Attack, which was very fun too. Next up is, well, my cousin let me borrow this one, but then afterwards he let me have it. It's just a shame though that I lost it because most of my games got stolen one time during middle school because someone stuck into my backpack. It's Fire Emblem, the game that introduced me to Lindis, and of course Hector and other characters. This was probably the first Fire Emblem game I played, and it was very good too. I actually loved this game, but I never actually beat it though, which is sad. Oh well. Anyway, moving on is the sequel to the first Mega Man Zero game, Mega Man Zero 2. I had 2 copies of this game, and sadly, during high school, someone stole it from me when they stole my Game Boy Advance. And unfortunately, even though I beat the game, I never did go back and try and see if I could get all these Cyber Elves, which sucks basically. I never did get all the forms either, or the EX moves, oddly. That game was hella hard. Mega Man Zero 3 is next on the list, of course, and that's the sequel to Mega Man Zero 2, where we got introduced to Omega and Dr. Wile. I enjoyed playing through Mega Man Zero 3, especially with the different Cyber Elves and everything in the Satellite Elves, which was pretty cool actually, and fighting against Omega Zero at the end was even awesomer. The Cannonball theme was just kick-ass. Sadly, this one got stolen too. Oh well. Damn it, I hate that. Anyway, and last but not least on the list is Pokemon Ruby version, which I got from one of my cousins. I enjoyed this one too, but after a while, I just stopped liking playing Pokemon for a good while, unless of course it was the classics. There were just too many things that I can't get the words right anyway, but that's pretty much it. Those are all the Game Boy Advance games I used to have back then, and it's just a shame that I'll probably never find most of them again, of course, unless I look on eBay or something, but that's pretty much it. Hey, did you enjoy that video? Do you want to see more videos done by me and various other things? Just click on the subscribe button right here on YouTube and subscribe to my channel. I'm getting more and more views on some of my videos each and every day. Or, if you want to, you can check out all my sprite works at Leon Murayami on DeviantArt.com. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.